This is episode number 188. Today, we're featuring watercolor superstar artist Thomas W. Schaller.
This is the PleinAir Podcast with Eric Rhoads, publisher and founder of PleinAir magazine. In the PleinAir Podcast, we cover the world of outdoor painting. Called Plein Air, the French coined the term, which means open air or outdoors. The French pronounce it Plein Air. Others say Plein Air. No matter how you say it, there is a huge movement of artists around the world who are going outdoors to paint. And this show is about that movement. Now, here's your host, author, publisher, and painter, Eric Rhoads.
Thank you, Jim Kipping, and welcome to the PleinAir Podcast. I am coming to you from the Adirondack Mountains in upstate New York, and I've done more painting this summer than any in the past. But of course, it's still not enough. And it's starting to cool down, the leaves are starting to turn, and I'm looking forward to painting some color. I love painting color. It's hard to do, actually, and get it right, I think. Speaking of color, the only live event we're doing this year is our Fall Color Week, which is going to be in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, where the Hudson River School painters painted. And we have some seats left. It's unusual because we're normally sold out. But, of course, we lost some people due to COVID. I don't mean lost them. I mean, they had to cancel for whatever reasons. But anyway, it's going to be held, and we thought for sure it wasn't, but now it is. And we're going to do it so it's safe. And so if you want to attend, you can come this year. And of course, if you're close, if you're on the East Coast or anywhere, really, you want to drive and you've been in quarantine, we'd love to have you. We're taking a lot of safety measures, but we're going to paint for a week. It's our retreat. It's called Fall Color Week, and you're going to love it. And just find out more about it at fallcolorweek.com. You know, this is an event that's been hard to get into. So if this is kind of like ringing a bell with you, you might want to come this year. If you feel like it's the right thing to do. By the way, artist Eric Capel is going to be with us. He lives in the area. He's going to show us all his favorite painting spots, and that's going to be pretty cool. So just visit fallcolorweek.com. Some big news. We are going to be doing the Plein Air Salon Awards ceremony, presenting the $15,000 grand prize and the $28,000 or $30,000 in prizes at 8 p.m. Eastern on the 25th of September. I almost said October. So just coming up really soon, in about 10 days from now or so. And you want to watch it. It's going to be live on Facebook. It's going to be live on a lot of other stuff. But we're going to award the money. We wanted to give it away at the August Plein Air Convention, which of course got canceled. And we were going to give it away originally at the May Plein Air Convention, which it got postponed and canceled and moved to August, and you know the drill. Anyway, we've been sitting on this money. We want to give it away. So you can learn more at pleinairsalon.com. While you're there, you want to make sure you get your entry in for this month by the end of the month, pleinairsalon.com. And of course, the biggest news of all time is that Realism Live, our online conference with the world's top instructors and attendees worldwide. I think we've got 30 or 40 registered out of the 1,200 or so that are already coming. You can come for about a tenth of the price you'd spend to go to one of our live events after you spent your expenses and your airfare and your rental car and all that stuff. This event is teaching all the disciplines of realism, right? Things that you know what they are, right? So plein air, landscape, still life, flowers, figure and portrait. For those of you who are plein air people, we've got world famous Mark D'Alessio is going to be teaching, among others. Eric Capel is going to be teaching, for instance, as well. And we have Kathy Odom, and that's on landscape. But we also have, some incredible artists teaching in still life, flowers, figure, portrait, some of the best in the world. And all of these things inform your plein air work, and your plein air work informs all these things. And so it makes it better. It's a good thing to do. You're going to be a better painter at the end of this 5 days. We've got a beginner day at the first day that is optional. And there's going to be a price increase on September 20th. Take advantage of it by saving $200 if you register before the end of September. So you just go to realismlive.com. That's where you find it. I should remind you also that Plein Air Magazine, the August-September issue, which is on the newsstands for a couple more weeks, includes an incredible feature called Beyond the Paintbrush with Kevin Mcpherson. And I just read that article the other day. I didn't write it, so I got a chance to read it. It's one of the best articles I've ever read, and it gives you an idea on how to use your creativity differently than you have been and to think about things differently. Kevin put this together, sheltering in place at his home in Mexico on the coast. It's really worth picking one up. Of course, we are now in 238 Michaels stores nationwide. We're also the number one selling art magazine in the art and photography category at Barnes & Noble nationwide. So you can get it there. Of course, you can get a subscription at PleinAirMagazine.com. So coming up after the interview, I'm going to be answering your art marketing questions in the Art Marketing Minute. But first, let's get right to our interview with the world-famous watercolor artist, Thomas W. Schaller. Thomas Schaller, welcome to the Plein Air Podcast.
Thank you, Eric. I'm thrilled to be here to join you and everybody.
So I understand that it's been a little smoky where you live.
A little bit. I mean, I'm very fortunate. Where I live is over by the sea, near the water, so I'm in no real danger like some are. But yeah, the air quality is pretty bad.
Yeah, I would imagine so. Well, so tell us just before we kind of begin, what has life been like for you in COVID? What have you been focusing on and doing with your time?
Well, yeah, that's a question on everybody's mind, right?
Yep.
I think I can speak for a lot of painters, artists in general. I think I can. At least the ones I've spoken to, I know this is the case, that in some ways we're hardwired to do a little better under these circumstances than other people. I guess by that I mean the pursuit of art is essentially, even if you do it with a group of people, which I love to do, but, making art is essentially a personal experience. A lot of us are kind of used to sitting alone drawing or painting, so it's not been ideal for me, so I don't want to make it sound too rosy, but on the other hand, it's been an opportunity for me to sort of reset, rethink, reestablish why I like to paint, what I want to paint, to investigate some things that I might not have had time to do before. So it's not been all bad, although I wish it would go away.
Yeah, well, we all wish that. Well, it is, it's interesting to hear. So in what ways have you recast your priorities? Are you thinking differently about the way you paint, or is it about what you paint? Help me understand that.
I am, yeah. I think when I originally started drawing as a kid, it was very solitary. My father was very anti-art, and I think there was some sort of strange subversive element to my wanting to draw, to sort of avoid him. It was a very private thing, so I always hid my drawings away, and that became sort of a lifestyle. Not really his fault. It's just the way it was. And I became very used to drawing and painting as a private endeavor where I didn't really share it. I didn't talk about it. So yeah, it's been very different. Obviously, my life over the last 10 years or so has been very different, very public. I teach a lot, taught a lot. I'm always painting with others and talking about art, and I love it. But so this period has given me a little opportunity to sort of re-engage with the original instincts I had to want to create art in the first place, in a healthy way, I think, which means to sort of think more about the storytelling aspect, what it is I have to say as an artist, what my voice is, and in a more technical way to sort of spend some quality studio time and plein air painting on my own, working out some compositional problems I thought I had and technical issues I wanted to work on, trying out new brushes, colors, paper, that sort of thing. when you live on an airplane and just fly from one teaching gig to the next, it's great in one way, but you lose the time to just stop and take a breath and think about what it is you're doing. So it's given me the opportunity to do that.
I think that's fascinating because, I think we tend to, we're creatures of habit. We tend to get into this mode of this is how I paint. And, you've been doing this for a very long time. And I want to go into that in just a second. But to be able to stop and say, am I doing it the way I want to do it? Should I try new ways? Should I try new approaches? That's very brave.
Well, thanks. I don't think of it as brave as much as kind of inevitable. I get very bored easily if I paint the same subjects or the same way over and over. So I'm always looking to try new ideas. It's just that they're always sort of forced upon me, or I have to make very, very quick decisions, which can be good. Yeah, but this has been a good opportunity to be a little more introspective and think about where I've come and where I want to go, and to plot it out a little more carefully. If that helps, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But yeah, so I've been plotting out a new book. I want to do online teaching, or hopefully, thank God, we could get back to real life teaching. And I've been thinking a lot about that. So I've been designing a new curriculum that I'd like to teach, a little bit, quite a bit different than what I did before, much less technique based, more inspirational based, based on why you want to paint in the first place, as opposed to just how you slap paint on a canvas. So, there's been a lot of good that's come out of this period.
Well, and it sounds like you're going to be more selective about what kind of things you're willing to get on an airplane for.
Yeah, I don't think I speak for myself only there, but if I'm honest, I was a little burned out with life out of a suitcase. I wanted to take a step back even a year or two ago from saying yes to absolutely everything, and yes, being a little more selective, just as you say. I love doing it, but I want to, I'd like to do it a little bit more on my terms, and I think I can do that, so that's been good too.
So why don't we kind of wind back? You talked about when you were a kid and you were drawing, and your dad didn't take well to the idea of art. Did your dad ever get an opportunity to understand that you became one of the most prominent, well-known watercolor artists in the world?
Yes and no. My dad and I had a very contentious early relationship. We had a family farm. He was a very, very focused guy, but it all has a happy ending. It turns out that he and I are very much alike. I mean, very much alike. He never wanted to have his own boss. He always wanted to have his own business. And I couldn't be more like that. I'm just the same. He essentially wanted to design his own life. And that has been the cornerstone of everything I do now and have always wanted to do. I thank him for that. So when the family farm began to fail, with all the corporate farms buying up littler farms all through the Midwest, he panicked a bit, didn't know what to do. So he and I worked together, and we started our own design, build, construction firm. I was still just a kid in high school, but I designed a lot of houses. And anyway, he and I worked together, and we designed houses and additions and renovations, and started a business together. It was one of the best things I ever did. And he and I became very close after that. A few years later, though, a number of years later, he came to visit me in New York, a place he vowed he would never go, but he did, and we had a great time. And he got to be around when I published my first book, and was very, very proud. And we lost him shortly, about a year after that. So anyway, we were very close.
A wonderful opportunity, though, for him to see what you know, that you were driven by something that you picked up as a child, and that you turned it into something. You turned it into a career. You became a published author. That's huge.
Yeah, it was a big deal because it gave us the chance, a time I always treasure and never forget. That we were just sitting and him saying the words that he was proud of me, and I mean, there was never any lack of love there. There was just this fundamental, apparent difference that really wasn't a difference. It was a similarity, and it took us about 30 years to figure out that we were really the same person. So we just had different ways of expressing it. So yeah,
well,
it was great.
He may have wanted you to kind of grow up and take over the farm, and maybe you weren't interested. I don't know, but that's interesting. You finally got there. That's all that matters, and I'm sure you're thankful for that. So you had this interest as a child, and then how did you take that to a career? What happened next?
Well, again, very much like my dad, I just never wanted to work for anybody else. I always wanted to devise a way forward or work for myself. I had this pretty naive notion about moving to New York and becoming a famous artist. And getting to New York's fairly easy if you really want to, but staying there is fairly hard. So I did go. I thought it would take about 2 weeks to become a famous artist. All people would have to do is look at my portfolio, my childish paintings, and it was a little harder than that. So I finished. Then I finished architecture school. I went through all the rigorous tests to get my official registration to become an official architect, which I have to admit I wasn't going to do. My dad was a little instrumental in talking me into doing that. I'm also thankful for him for doing that. So then I went back to New York, and circuitous route, but I ended up back in New York figuring I would work as an architect. But what I did do instead was work up a portfolio of drawings that I had done. Because I also had a 4-year stint in art school. And I thought, if I'm going to be an architect, if I'm honest, what I'm really interested in are ideas about cities, ideas about the built environment, drawings and paintings of the built environment. I wasn't really all that interested in working up blueprints. So I sat in my little apartment. I did about a dozen pretty bad watercolors of architectural subjects. I walked around the streets of New York and ended up getting work. And one thing led to another. And I made myself a career doing architectural watercolors, which was in the 1980s. And even in those days, mostly that kind of work was being done on computer digital renderings and that sort of thing. So it helped me kind of stand out in the crowd and bring a little of the handcrafted, a little bit more of the expressive traditions of architectural drawing and painting to the modernism in the design world going on in those days.
So when did Plein Air enter into all of this?
I always was fascinated with Plein Air. I did a lot of, in art school as well as architecture school, sitting on your butt in front of a beautiful building or city square, touring Europe and sketching. Sketching was a big, big deal for me. live sketching, and I was, not unlike many of my friends, really addicted to hand-done drawing. Not painting so much in those days, but sketching. And so, yeah, I would sit on buses and airplanes and classrooms, and I became a really, really habitual, addicted to sketching. In architecture school, we were introduced to the watercolor techniques of the Beaux-Arts days, just as sort of a historical interest. Most of my classmates laughed it off as a waste of time, but something about that clicked. And I did a lot of study on my own and learned that all the hand-done drawing that all of my classmates and I were doing many years ago was supplemented with watercolor sketching too. So I began to travel with a cheap little watercolor sketch kit, and I didn't have ambitions of doing great art. I just liked the process of painting on site, to try to get down quickly in my sketchbook the character of people, places, and things that drew my attention. The world of actual plein air painting came later, but was built on that early interest and at least comfort with the idea of doing that.
Well, it's a great foundation.
It was a great foundation, and I think what I'm really trying to say with too many words is, when I started teaching, and I teach a lot of plein air, a lot of my people in my groups are horrified. They're terrified of painting plein air. They're scared of it. And I understand that, but I'm not a psychologist, but I understand a little of the psychology of that fear-based resistance to plein air painting. And I think, in general, what it often is that people are just afraid of not being able to create standing on a street corner what you're able to create in your studio. So what I always counsel them is that don't worry about it. It's a different animal. It's not the same thing. I mean, I do know plein air artists that can produce beautiful finished work on site. But if I'm honest, that's not the kind of plein air work that really excites me. I admire it, but what I think's great about painting on site is the fact you're not in your studio. You can't control the weather, the changing in the light. You can't control the sounds and the noise around you. I don't know, for some reason I'm always painting in Europe, in Italy mostly, when I'm teaching plein air, it seems. And people say, how do you do it? It's so chaotic. And that's part of it. It's the ability to sort of experience all that, work that energy into your painting if you want. Don't fight against it, but to accept it, to bring it all in, to make that part of your expression. The light changes so quickly, but there too, it's a lesson. It teaches you how to choose a subject quickly, how to make very fast decisions and get those ideas down on paper very, very quickly. I also say that I still love studio painting, but my plein air work, my studio painting, I think, would be crap without my experience in plein air painting, because of those lessons in teaching you how to make a quick decision, decide on the fly what the composition feels right, not overthinking things. A lot of us, myself, I can say, overthink our compositions too much sometimes. Generally, with a lot of experience comes the ability to know almost instinctively where you should stand, how you should look at something, how to edit it, when to zoom in, when to pull back. And there's just no other way that I know of how to teach yourself those lessons than to just get over it, grab your sketchbook, go outside draw, and paint. It's not only fun, but it's just an amazing classroom. So, yeah, and it's also a great way to interact with other artists. Going out with a group of artists painting is one of the great joys of life, and I feel badly for other artists that don't avail themselves of that privilege, because it is a privilege. It's great fun and always leads to something better.
Well, it really is a privilege, and you really develop great relationships with people when you paint with other people. The other thing that I find is that I'm in touch with people that I never would be in touch with otherwise, because people stop and talk to you. And in the beginning days, that would intimidate me, because I was afraid they would judge my painting or judge me. But I found it to be, kind of a memory stimulator, because I would remember the people that I would meet in the streets. Do you find that you're also interacting with the community that's in the area?
I do, yeah, very much. Around here, it happens a lot. I paint outside here in Venice, California, down by the canals. And yeah, I actually quite like it. It's the thing I thought I would hate, that a stranger would walk up and judge my work. And I won't say they don't. I mean, you get all the common questions. Oh, are you an artist? Or, my grandmother used to paint watercolors. Yeah. And the dumb questions. Why did you use that color? Why did you do this? But over time, I've come to kind of like that. It causes me to ask myself that question. Oh, I don't know. Why did I choose that color? Why did I choose to paint this and not that? In Europe, I find it happens more often. Maybe that's because I paint a lot more urban scenes probably in Europe than I do here in California. But people are just very curious what it is you're painting. Often you're painting their house or their grandfather's house. And yeah, I've made friends and that I've stayed in touch with my whole life because of it. Never would have happened otherwise. It's a unique and amazing way to interact with the world around you that other people just don't have. So I feel very blessed for that.
You have a different technical approach when you're painting indoors versus when you're painting outdoors?
I do. I try not to, but I think what you said earlier sort of rang a bell with me. We all have habits. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. I'm very fascinated with people's habits and my own too. I always think they're worth looking at and investigating if a habit is working well for you. So obviously there are bad habits for overeating or whatever, but in painting, we might do something that works for us once and it gets stuck in the back of our brain subliminally and we do it over and over. We might always grab the same color or the same brush or the same paper. So when you do a lot of studio work, I think you fall into habits that generally don't necessarily serve you very well when you're painting on site. Different kinds of paper work for me better outdoors than they might indoors. Different sorts of brushes. Obviously, if you're painting watercolor, your paint drying time changes radically if you're painting outdoors in a warm climate. So you begin to apply paint very differently. And that's good. There is never one right way to do anything. So how I paint plein air does inform how I paint in the studio and vice versa, but I don't always expect the same result. It's kind of a different way of telling a story.
Now, was there a particular reason that you were drawn to watercolor, and have you ever experimented with other mediums, whether they're water mediums like gouache or casein or acrylic or water-based oils? Have you ever moved into oils? Just kind of curious, because you're obviously known as a great watercolorist.
Well, I have tried. I've tried regular oil-based oils. I'd be lying if I didn't say how much I admire people who have great facility in that medium. It's obviously classic. There are effects that you cannot achieve in any other way, I believe, outside the world of oil painting. I've tried water-based oils. Great work I see done with them, but not by me. I was all thumbs. Sort of similar with acrylic. I go through periods where I use acrylics to sort of play around with casual ideas of composition and bigger ideas. But nothing really ever tugs at my heartstrings or makes me feel as expressive as I can with watercolor. And I think for me, it's simply the fact that I like to work quickly, generally, always. I may be just very impatient. I want to see the result very quickly. And in watercolor, you have the white of the paper. So with my groups, I always joke around. I hold up a blank sheet of white paper and say, look, you're already halfway done. And in a sense, you are. Because one of the powers of watercolor is the fact that the strength of what you don't paint is just as much as the strength of what you do paint. It's saving of the white paper or using of the white of the paper to shine through in a luminescent way the layers of wash and color. So you're using the actual surface of the paper much more than you do in any other medium. And just that fact alone has always been enough to pull me back over and over to watercolor. I love drawing. I love plain drawing, but it's really watercolor that does it for me.
Well, I don't want to insult anybody, but I think that people who can do watercolor are a very special breed of people. And the reason I say that is because that you have to think backwards. In oil painting, it's additive, right? We can add a white brush stroke with a white roof on top of a barn after we've laid something else down and still make it work. But watercolor is subtractive, and it seems to me that you have to be willing to think 300 steps in advance, the minute you start painting.
Well, I think you're right in that. I always say that watercolor is a subtractive technique. You start with 100% of light, and then you begin to carefully or not so carefully subtract away. People ask me a lot, how do you paint the light in watercolor? And the answer is, of course, you don't. It's already there. What you paint are the shades and the shadows that give light the identity and the life, the luminosity that you want it to have. Light can't exist without dark, so you paint the darker areas to give light its life. Looking back in art school, I studied sculpture, was my first major. Because of my interest in the built environment and architecture, I somehow thought maybe that was the path for me, that I'd be a 3D artist in sculpture. And I was reading a book on the great sculptors, Bernini and Michelangelo, etc. They talked a lot about taking a large untouched block of stone or marble and subtracting away the unnecessary parts to reveal the amazing art within. And that's always stuck with me. In no way do I compare myself to those guys, but I'm just saying, in a somewhat similar way, watercolor reminds me of that. You start with something, you carve away the light to reveal the painting that's just waiting there to be found. And I just don't get that same rush with acrylic or with oil, I'm sorry to say. I wish I did. I just think it's something very, very different. It's very special.
Well, you're fortunate that you
But
have that passion. So one of the things that I think I said to you the other day when you were on one of my live broadcasts is that I think that you are one of the best designers that I know as a painter. Lots of painters in my life, but you have such great design skills. What does it take to develop good design skills as a painter?
that is a great question, and I hope I can come up with a great answer. I do agree with you that for me it is always about design, whether you paint in a very realistic manner or completely abstract. It's always design. And when I sit around with my painter friends, somehow or the other, the conversation always ends up with that. It's that abstract collision of lights and darks, big and small shapes that make a painting either good or bad, effective or ineffective, or communicative or not. So all I can say is that it's always on my mind. I don't think there's any right way to do it. I try not to repeat myself. I try to always find new ways of arranging those shapes on a piece of paper, but my method, and it's not a lesson, it's just an anecdote. If it works for anybody, please feel free to steal it. I didn't invent the sketchbook, but I sit and doodle constantly. I do abstract shapes of dark and light and midtone, and I just design. I even dream about shapes of light and dark. I'll wake up in the middle of the night and I'll just sketch them in a sketchbook by my bed. And it's amazing how many of these really informal abstract scribbles end up becoming paintings at some point down the road. I really think it's all about design. The artist has the ability to orchestrate the viewer's experience. And the only way to do that is to pull them inside your painting and sort of gently suggest a way that they can move around inside your work to have an experience that you might want them to have, or maybe one that you never planned. But it's really all about the design of the darks and lights and the shapes that even make that possible. Again, I always say if I live long enough, I'll be an abstract painter, but I think I need about 100 more years. But that's the direction I'm headed in that direction, so we'll see.
Well, I think that's one of the hardest things to develop, is to understand that there's abstract shapes in everything.
There is, and my admiration is for abstract painters is boundless, because it's a naive thing when people say, "Oh, it's so easy to do an abstract painting." No, it's easy to do, but it's not easy to do a good one. It's probably the hardest thing. Among my favorite artists, and whenever I'm in New York City, I go immediately to the Museum of Modern Art, and I stand in front of the abstract expressionists, Rothkos and the Robert Motherwells and Franz Kleins, and I'm just shocked anew every single time at the power of their ability to edit away everything unnecessary and just give you a completely emotional experience with shapes of light and dark and warm and cool colors. It's just amazing to me. I aspire to be that effective as an artist.
Now, how do you apply that in your own work? How do you get that kind of clarity of vision, that editing, to take the unnecessary out? Because it's a temptation that's there for all of us. There's so much detail.
Yeah, and from my background, a background of drawing, which is, expressing things with line, and then all of my architectural training, I don't regret it, but I sometimes resent it. I mean, I was taught, driven into my head, that the more detail, the better. And, as a painter, that whole idea is just turned on its head. The more detail in a painting I mean, it depends on what kind of painter you are, but for me, I look back at my paintings even a year or two ago and I think, oh God, if only I'd used 10 or 20% fewer brush marks or 3 or 4 fewer colors, it would have been a much better painting. So that's the path I'm on. As I say, I do generally before every painting, I do an abstract sketch of just a tonal sketch of darks and lights and shapes so that I know more or less before I start painting where I want the darks to be placed, where I want to save the lights, and more or less where I want the midtones. That's the story. That's the whole thing right there. So even if I'm painting something that's fairly realistic or recognizable, I'm cognizant that the more lines or details I put in, the more I might dilute the original idea or impact of that abstract composition. Every painting isn't the same, and it's a delicate balance, but I actually love walking that line and trying to see how little I can get away with, how few details I can put in to an otherwise fairly realistic looking scene. So yeah, I'm still very interested in painting things that look like they might be real, even if they're completely imaginary or I've used a great deal of license, but I'm equally interested in how much I can get away from that. And the viewer's eye can fill in a lot of detail that's not there. And that's another fun game to play, is that you can set up this unspoken communication with viewers, people that you may never meet, that you can imagine looking at your painting, filling in details that you didn't draw or paint, and having this whole conversation that you're not even aware of. I don't know, it's very exciting to me to play around with that and see how little I can paint and still imply a lot. The great teachers I've had, which have been few, but Joseph Zbukvik was one of my first, and he said that a lot before I could understand it really. It's better to imply than it is to state some of the time. So if you just imply detail rather than expressing it all completely, you end up with a much more poetic, a much more expressive, a much more inclusive painting. And I still look at his paintings and I'm shocked at how much he seems to imply just with a shape of tone or color. So that's.
Well, this is probably a good moment to bring up the fact that we're going to be doing an all watercolor event. It's the first time we've ever done it. We had been confidentially, well, I guess it's not confidential anymore, but we had been working on developing a watercolor convention. As you know, we do a figurative and a plein air convention.
I know, yeah.
And so we had been working on a live in-person watercolor convention, and then, of course, COVID hits. So we're going to be doing a January conference online just for watercolor, and you and Joseph Zbukvik are headliners in that event. So people will have to watch for more information on that. They can go to watercolorlive.com to learn about it. I want to ask you about career. I hear I interview a lot of watercolor painters, and I hear from a lot of watercolor painters, and a common question is this: sometimes a belief that watercolor is not as accepted, maybe among collectors or gallerists, or is not as considered as important as oil paintings, for instance. And I think that's just complete nonsense, but I may be completely wrong. What kind of things have you had to battle, or have you? And does that gap really exist?
That is a great question. I think there's probably something there, but I think it has changed over time. I think we're entering an era where it might be more smoke than fire. I think the perception among collectors is changing, but I also think there's maybe a new population out there of collectors that appreciate watercolor in a way that may not have been true 50 or 100 years ago. There's a perception, not entirely wrong, that watercolors have to be displayed glazed behind glass or plexiglass, and so they're therefore more difficult to show in exhibits, more difficult for museums to buy and exhibit, more difficult for collectors to get because they're difficult to see or photograph. Maybe that's a different discussion. There are coatings a lot of artists use in watercolor now to be able to show their work without having it to be glazed. I don't do that. I still show my work glazed and uncoated. But yeah, I may not be the expert in this. I'm not an expert marketer. I do what I do. I know what I know. I have a very small group of very dedicated collectors, and I'm always looking out and reaching for new ones. I have been lucky to have my work collected by a few museums and galleries. But I do think that the knowledge about watercolor and the scholarship of watercolor has changed enough that collectors are looking at it anew. And I've been very gratified, or maybe just very fortunate. But,
well, and I would argue that you've been very successful as well, and that those things don't appear to have affected your career. And I was going to ask you, because you seem to have a pretty good feel for marketing. You clearly have become a very top brand. Using the term brand as an artist, of course, but you've become a very well-known artist, very top brand, very sought after as a teacher, very sought after as someone who paints and people want to collect. How does that happen for you? Did it just kind of, were you the person sitting at the diner? Somebody walked in and discovered you, or did you actually worked hard at making it happen?
This is a great question. I don't talk a lot about it, but I think it's something that ought to be talked about, is that I think it might be fair to say that many artists aren't especially adept at marketing themselves or at sales or at just the simple mechanics of running their own business. So all my years in New York having my own business, working as an architectural watercolorist, I don't regret at all, but one reason I don't was it taught me, or I taught myself, just the very basics of how to balance books, how to take care of myself, how to look out for myself and look out for others, and how to work with clients. I'm not a really social person, but I like people. And one-on-one, I'm pretty good with talking to people about art and about what I do and about what they do. So what I'm trying to say is I think I'm not complaining. I think I'm very lucky that it hasn't just been luck. I think visibility it all comes down to visibility. Getting your work in front of as many eyeballs as possible is key for young artists starting out, and even for more established artists. You can fall off the radar very quickly if you're not always out there and showing your work. And I've always made it a point of talking to people online or in the real world, of just engaging them about art and about my art, about their art, about life in general. and that human connection is invaluable. It always pays off in one way or another. They don't always buy your art, but somehow it always works out that it pays off more than it doesn't.
Well, there's this
Generally,
this misperception that marketing is a crass or classless act, and of course some people do that. You know, you can watch car dealer ads all day long that make you want to be sick, but it really is just kind of like you said. It's about raising your hand. It's about just, hey, make sure you pay attention to me too, and it's nothing inappropriate about that. Yet that there are artists who are resistant to the very idea. Their idea is, I should just be able to paint, and if I'm good, then I'll be discovered.
Well, yeah, and I hear you. I hear them. I would just say, you know, it's a very big world. There are a lot of amazing painters out there, a lot of voices. Yes, you have to stick your hand up and say, look at me. And you have to be willing or able to have the hand slapped down. You have to enter competitions, which I didn't for many years. You have to be willing to get the rejection letters, which I have a mountain of, and say, is that why you paint? No, but that is one irreplaceable way of having your work seen, noticed, and gotten out there. There are artists who are very good at exhibiting, but very bad at marketing, and that's a bit mysterious. But I think getting all that alphabet soup of letters after your name is not everything. I do not ever suggest that people paint to get into big competitions. But on the other hand, entering them and just having the backbone to do that and to put yourself out there and know that at least half the time you're going to get slapped down doesn't take any shine away from the 10, 20, 30% of times you don't. You don't.
Right.
But more importantly, along the way, you meet people that stick with you and you stick with them, and that they're lifelong friends. And I don't mean people that you can use. I just mean, I think a rising tide raises all boats. I do whatever I can to help out other artists, and that comes back to me because they do whatever they can to help me out. And it's, one hand washes the other, and ultimately it all comes down to people, which was very different than my old career, which was not really like that at all. So that's the one thing I love about the art world. It's very, very people-oriented, and it's quite different than the corporate world of advertising and all of that. Ultimately, that's people too, but it's people hiding behind a corporate logo. So it's quite different. So anyway, I don't really think I'm any expert at all. I'm finding my way through the dark like everybody else. But I enjoy it. So you know, there's always room to learn and do things better. I'm not very good at marketing. I would disagree with you there. I just know that it's important. Nobody's going to see you if you don't show up. So showing up is half the battle.
I would say the other half of the battle is just understanding what you just said, and that is that just knowing that you have to do something, that you can't just do nothing, because doing nothing, you can be the greatest artist in the world and never be noticed. So doing something. I want to ask you before we wrap up here, you have had a huge opportunity to be present in China. China has this massive plein air movement, probably bigger than the plein air movement in America, and of course it's a bigger country in terms of population. But talk to me a little bit about what's going on over there.
I would agree, and it's mind blowing. Every time I'm there, I'm shocked at at the quality, the amount of work, the popularity of watercolor, but of art in general, is stunning. Not to get too off topic, but also Russia. And I know you've just been there too, but I've been to Russia quite a number of times, and I would say the difference there is the level of education, starting with kids at a very early age, teaching them art history is very different than you find in the U.S.
Well, the appreciation for art in Russia and Europe in general, but especially Russia, is much higher than we find it here. You know, the average man or the average woman knows about art and artists and art history as part of their regular education.
Absolutely. I mean, I got into literal conversations on the subway in Moscow with complete strangers. I don't speak Russian, but they spoke English enough to talk to me very in depth about art and architecture and music and the arts in general. It was gratifying, but a little depressing because it doesn't happen here very often, if ever. But in China, I'm very exposed to the watercolor world there. It's breathtaking. We visited a few schools, and kids 14, 15 years old are doing work in watercolor that make me want to burn all my brushes. They're so good. And I know part of it's cultural, but part of it is just constant study and practice. And part of it is what you said. It's just the general cultural appreciation, understanding of the importance of art that I really wish Americans in general felt. Obviously, those of us in the art world do, but yeah, you don't have to beat it into their heads there. It's just there waiting. So
and
you're not looked at as some kind of, yeah.
Well, I wonder how much it has to do with calligraphy. You know, the idea of using ink and brush as part of a calligraphy system, and the calligraphy and watercolor.
I think that's huge. I took a couple of calligraphy courses, two in Japan and another in China, and the skill required, it takes a lifetime to get really good at that. But I think stepping back from that or widening the lens, it's just older people and artisans there and always are respected and appreciated in Asian culture, I think a little bit more than is typical in Western culture. Your grandfather's sitting there and nobody's laughing at him, and he's doing amazing calligraphy, and the kids appreciate that and learn from that. Even if they don't do it, they understand the importance of it. But calligraphy specifically is, it's so informative and instrumental in the formation, I think, of classical and modern day Chinese watercolors. It's the handling of the brush and just the ability to apply a wet medium to a dry surface is like nothing else I've seen anywhere on earth. It's amazing. I didn't burn my brushes, but I have wanted to a number of times.
Well,
that's okay.
Yeah, I'm so hoping that things continue to go well so that we can get back over there. I was due there, as you know, in April. Good thing I didn't go, but I was going to be speaking in 7 cities and visiting universities and doing lectures and 2 Plein Air events, and I was so looking forward to it. So I'm hoping to be able to get back there. I know you are as well, and I'm also hopeful that a lot of the people who are in China who are big Plein Air watercolor fanatics will join us on Watercolor Live. I think that'd be fun.
I would love that. I think that would be phenomenal if it can happen.
Absolutely. Well,
before
Thomas,
we run out of time, I
just
brief? Well, I just wanted to thank you, not just for this, Eric, but for all you do for the arts and for us, for artists, your newsletters, your energy, all of your different projects. I just hope you know how grateful we all are and how much it helps, especially now when we can't get out of our houses as much as we'd like. But anyway, I'm just very grateful for you and for all you do. It means a lot.
That's very sweet. Thank you. I love doing it, and just, it needed to be done. Well, Thomas, your website is thomasschaller.com, SCHALLER. And so
Yes,
that's where they can find out all about you and visit you. This has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for doing it.
It's a real pleasure for me too. I admire you. I like you. I like hanging around you. And again, I'm really grateful for this and for all you do. So thanks for spending the time.
Well, thanks again to Thomas W. Schaller. What a brilliant artist and really some good deep thinking there. I really appreciate that. So, are you guys ready for some marketing ideas?
This is the Marketing Minute with Eric Rhoads, author of the #1 Amazon bestseller, Make More Money Selling Your Art. Proven techniques to turn your passion into profit.
In the Marketing Minute, I try to answer your art marketing questions, and you can email yours to eric@artmarketing.com. Here's a question from Kelly Johnson in Omaha, Nebraska, who asks, if you're the only one doing your marketing, what are some suggestions you have on doing market research to find out what really matters to your buyers? What do you think about sending surveys, for example? Well, that's a great question, Kelly. And the number one thing that most marketers miss is understanding that they need to listen to their customers. Your customers have all the answers that you need. Now, in selling art, it's a little bit more difficult than that because it's not real cut and dry, because it's an emotional response someone's having to a painting typically. So surveys can be great, but most of us aren't very good at surveys. Most of us are not trained at how to do them properly. And if you don't do them properly, you get biased answers. And if you get bad information, you get bad, you respond badly. You don't do things properly. I'm trained. I was trained in research years and years ago. I used to do a lot of research, and I'm still not very good at it, and I don't rely on it a lot. I do ask survey questions from time to time, and I do get some answers, but I'm looking for things that are, more like, what artist would you like us to do a video of, or what artist would you like us to bring into a convention, versus understanding the psychology of things a little bit more. Now, you're really looking for the things that people say that might help you in your marketing to get attention from others who are like them. Like, how do they talk about your work, or what it means to them, or why they wanted to own it, or maybe why they bought it or something, if somebody can articulate that. Some of those are difficult. Surveys are usually only valid with big samples too. So usually a very small number of people participate in a survey, like 1%, 2%. And so you got to have a big sample for it to have any meaning, right? So if you've got 1,000 people, and you probably don't, then you've got to have, 1% of 1,000 people, which is 100 people, or 10 people. Man, don't ask me to do math. But the idea is that you want to have a decent enough survey size. Most people don't get the answers that they need. So one of the best ways to do it, and I learned this a long time ago from a buddy of mine, is that he hired somebody who called his buyers and asked them to just talk to him about their work. Now, you don't have to do that. You can do it yourself, but people are not going to tell you the complete truth because they don't want to hurt your feelings if there's anything that would hurt your feelings. But having somebody else call for you, it's like saying, hey, I've got this friend. Her name is Kelly Johnson from Omaha, Nebraska, and she said that you bought one of her paintings. I'm doing a little bit of market research for her. Would you be willing to spend a couple minutes on the phone with me? And I want to ask you some questions to understand it, because I'm trying to help her with her marketing. Some people would say yes, some people would say no, and you're being perfectly transparent about that. And then you can just ask them questions about, I'm just kind of curious, what was it about that painting that you liked, and how are you feeling about it? And did you feel like it was a good experience? And, things like that. But what you want to do is try to have permission to record it, because that's a great tool, because you're looking for terms. You're looking for things that people say. So I was doing some marketing for our Realism Live conference, and I did a thing where I asked people to record some testimonials for me, and I was listening to things they said and how they said them, and then I'm able to use that kind of language when I'm marketing at that, because they're very similar to the people I'm trying to attract, right? So this is all very difficult, but art is again a little different animal. So typical research, if I'm doing a widget, I'm trying to sell the easel brush clipper, the value specs or something, then I can do some research about, that a little bit more, and I can apply that in mass marketing. But if I'm selling a painting, because it's so personal, it's a little bit more difficult. So anyway, give it a try, see what happens. Now here's a question from Ryan Davis in Cape Coral, Florida, who says, when you look at the great contemporary master artists, it seems to me that that time is the only way to build a big brand. What advice do you have for those of us who don't have that so many years of experience? Well, first off, years of experience are invaluable, of course, and big brands are built over time, of course, but it's not always just time. You see, I could probably name a lot of people I know who have got a lot of time but don't have a lot of success, and they're good artists. And so why is that? Well, it's because they're not combining time with repetition of message, and they're not doing the right things that are going to get them noticed and known. The one thing that the people who are contemporary masters, who are well known, understand is that these are that you have to do certain things on a regular basis. You got to be doing shows on a regular basis. Got to be doing books or articles. You got to get exposure. You got to do advertising. You got to do things that draw attention to you. And it's never just one thing. The tendency today is to make it about, well, I'll just do social media. Well, social media is the most misunderstood advertising medium around. It can be very effective. I use it, but I don't use it for all things, because first off, I would never do only social media, because you don't want to have everything reliant on one particular thing, because if that one thing changes or there's laws passed or whatever, then it's no longer going to work for you. But also because there's a lot of different things that we as artists have to do. And so look for the things that are going to move the needle forward, and that's marketing in different ways. Remember also, social media, on a typical Facebook account, for instance, I've got my max, which is 5,000 on my Facebook account. I know that every time I tweet something out or post something, as it is in Facebook's world, I know that only 2% of my audience is going to see it. Now, that means only 2% of that 5,000 are ever going to see what I post. Now, I have some tricks that I have learned about and employ that get me actually pushed out there to a higher percentage, but it's probably still only 6 to 8%, and that's because I work very hard at that. It's you're not necessarily going to accomplish your marketing with social media. The other thing with social media, and again, I'm not anti-social media. I use it a lot, but most of us as artists don't have. Most of our followers are not collectors. Most of them are fellow artists, and that's so you're kind of preaching to the choir, the people who may or may not be buying art from you, and so there's a lot of things that you've just got to do. So, Ryan, I think the answer to your question is it's not time; it's time plus repetition of advertising, of messages. I just had a situation where an artist who had been advertising with us decided to move all of the advertising dollars out and move the advertising dollars into social media because that artist didn't feel like that the results were there. But the artist got into several galleries as a result of the advertising. The artist got invited into several shows as a result of the advertising. And as a result, the artist is feeling, well, I haven't been able to track direct sales. Well, the direct sales may not be happening. And usually if something isn't happening, it's because you're doing something wrong. I can have two advertisers and I can have them do the same amount of advertising. And one advertiser will get really brilliant results, another advertiser won't get results. And it's because of what they say in their ads, how they structure their ads, what the call to action is, what are the things they're trying to motivate people to do. Of course, it also has to do with the art. Is the art any good? And we all believe our art's good, but not everybody else believes that. And so, we kind of have to fight that battle. But the idea is that when you're in a group of, let's say you're in a cluster of the right kind of people. So I'm in a cluster. Fine Art Connoisseur magazine last month went out to 500,000 people. Big audience, very unusual. We normally don't have that big audience, but we did it for that one issue. And but the people we typically are going to, if somebody came to us and said, we want to send this magazine to a bunch of school art teachers, we might say, yeah, that's nice. Maybe we'd like for them to have it, but they're not going to do any good for advertisers, because advertisers know that those people are not likely to have the income. No offense to anybody, just being practical here, might not likely have the income to buy a $5,000 or $10,000 painting. So, when you look for targeted clusters, like Fine Art Connoisseur, for instance, has a targeted cluster of people who are known to spend a lot of money on paintings. They're known to be collectors. They are known as a concentrated group of collectors. It's very desirable. So it's not about big numbers as much as it is about, the right people who can buy the right thing from you. And that's what you always want to be focusing on. So I'm not sure I answered your question. I probably got to it in a roundabout way, Ryan. But if you're seeing great contemporary masters, and they're succeeding, yes, they have been around a long time. And time is one thing that, you can cheat time a little bit. You can speed things up a little bit, but, time is on your side. But if you're not doing the right things, the time isn't going to help. So I hope that helps. Anyway, that has been the Marketing Minute.
This has been the Marketing Minute with Eric Rhoads. You can learn more at artmarketing.com.
All right. Well, reminder to check out the Plein Air Salon Awards show that's going to take place on the 25th of September. You can learn more about it at PleinAirSalon.com. Don't forget to enter while you're there. Also, consider joining me at Fall Color Week, the first and only live in-person event we're able to do this year. We had to cut all the others out. And if you feel like you're up to it and you feel like you'd love to go paint with some friends outdoors, it's going to be a lot of fun. It's fallcolorweek.com. Also, check out Realism Live, our virtual online conference. It's got a stellar lineup. And remember, the price goes up $200 as of the end of the month. And so you want to save the money and get in now. If you've not seen my blog where I talk about art, life, and philosophy, mostly philosophy on kind of thoughts, it was created to pass some wisdom on to my kids. Anyway, it's up to about 250,000 readers. Check it out. It's called Sunday Coffee, and it comes free to you every week if you go to coffeewitheric.com. Well, this is always fun. We'll do it again sometime, like next week. I will see you then. My name is Eric Rhoads. I'm the publisher and founder of Plein Air Magazine. You can find us online at outdoorpainter.com. Remember, it's a big world out there. Make sure you go paint it. Paint some fall color. I'll see you. Bye-bye.
This has been the Plein Air Podcast with Plein Air Magazine's Eric Rhoads. You can help spread the word about plein air painting by sharing this podcast with your friends. And you can leave a review or subscribe on iTunes so it comes to you every week. And you can even reach Eric by email, eric@pleinairmagazine.com. Be sure to pick up our free ebook, 240 plein air painting tips by some of America's top painters. It's free at pleinairtips.com. Tune in next week for more great interviews. Thanks for listening.